fighter planes based in England, operating in the skies of Western Europe against the German Air Force. This is the P-47, the Thunderbolt, a fast, tough, high-altitude fighter with a dive like its name and an 8-gun blast in its wings. Here is the Lightning, the P-38, master of the air in many theaters of war. The long range and concentrated firepower of this great fighter counted in Western Europe, too. The Mustang, the P-51, longest range fighter in the world. Speed, fast climb, quick dive, tight turn. A fighter pilot's dream. Into these three great fighters, America poured its genius, its millions of man-hours of labor, its faith in victory against the Luftwaffe. And in their single cockpits, it placed its carefully chosen sons, trained to a fighting edge, trained as never before. Here is their report, catch as catch could by their own gun cameras in the instant of action, and delivered in return for your toil and your treasure and your high hopes. This is a Thunderbolt base in East Anglia on the east coast of England. One of many such bases from which our fighter planes swarmed up into the far red yonder of battle to the east. Their main job, although they struck many other blows, was to escort and protect our heavy 4-engine bombers, the big friends, against the Focke-Wulf 190s, the ME 109s, and the enemy's rocket-lobbing twin engines, Ju-88s, ME 210s, 410s, and others. To attack them whenever, wherever, and in whatever strength they appeared. Our direct challenge for control of the air. Trucks bring the pilots from the field to the squadron dispersal hut for intelligence interrogation after the mission. Coffee and sandwiches if they want it. Little action today, just a routine escort.
You saw 4 190s on the field.
That's right. Harry saw them, too.
I think it was this field, Jack, further west. We made the 180 here and flew about 2 minutes on 340.
Well, that's about 15 miles south of Hanover. We thought that field was knocked out.
They seem like ordinary American boys, but look a little closer. Now they pile in a Jeep and ride to chop. They have Jeeps enough, but they like it this way. They kid a lot, high-spirited. And later they relax and enjoy the not too frequent sunlight. Unless some joker is present, and he usually is. They keep pretty fit, ready to stand anything up to 7 hours in a single-seater in sub-stratosphere, alert every second. And they keep their eye in. This fellow has 22 destroyed. Well, he may have if he keeps at it. And they won't be clay pigeons. The old swimming hole is the same in England as at home. They had a beautiful summer in England that day. Little aquatic practice won't hurt either. They may have to make a high dive with chute and become a channel swimmer almost any time. Of course, it gives their airborne pals a fine chance to practice low flying a bit. The swimmers take no chances on this buzz job. Maybe they're learning not to get behind the 8-ball here. Put the 6 in the corner. Getting in shape for Wimbledon in a small way. Good shot. Keep your eye on the little white ball, Eddie. Keeping up with their crooning, naturally. May need that in the good old by and by. Everybody's favorite newspaper in this town. What goes on in New Guinea, China, and Luzon? What's happening at home? Best of all is their comradeship. Fellows who are trusting one another with their lives in this teamwork war learn to be friends. Somewhere else in England, and another day, from deep sweeps into enemy territory, a weather reconnaissance plane flies in. Its reports are cross-checked with many others, writing the destiny of today or tomorrow in atmospheric pressure lines. Fair in this theater means not impossible, and weather is almost enemy number one. At 8th Air Force, General Doolittle discusses fighter protection.
The 8th Fighter Command will give fighter cover to targets and back from the targets. It's desirable that we peel off as many fighters as possible to come down east of the Ruhr and strafe ground targets. How many do you want to peel off?
Well, General, we're spreading over a pretty wide area there. I'd recommend very seriously that we hold all strafing to a minimum.
All right. Go ahead and send that over to the 8th Fighter Command.
Yes, sir.
The bomber plan, timing, altitudes, forces, course, and targets have reached the combat operations room at Headquarters 8th Fighter Command. Major General Kepner commanding. Now the General and his Chief of Staff, Brigadier General Griswold, come in to inspect and discuss the plan of escort. Colonel Burns, operations, determines what group shall fly. Colonel James decides their disposition. Colonel Callahan, intelligence, estimates where and when the enemy will intercept. It's an intricate scientific plan, based upon information from many sources, and upon the route and location of the target. Then a field order goes out to the fighter wings, and through them to the fighter groups and squadrons which they control. This command supports 1st and 2nd Bomber Forces. 62nd Group P-47s will escort heavy bombers over enemy coast through target to limit of endurance. All observations will be reported over RT. The field order is received at the fighter base by the duty officer in group operations. He checks the field order for the group rendezvous time with the bombers. He calls maintenance, armament, and others. And in the still dark hours of the morning, a squadron intelligence officer shakes the pilots out of their deep sleep. Briefing at 6:30. Why can't they fight the war at a reasonable hour? Wake up over there if you want any breakfast. There's a show on. Crews, meantime, are warming and priming the aircraft. The crews are a vital part of this show, tune their kites to fighting pitch. Going places as always, long-range wing tanks are fitted. Now briefing and everybody present. The colonel comes in. These fellows are veterans of many missions, so he gives them the essentials without ceremony.
Okay, boys, today we're going to escort 10 boxes of bombers, 36 ships to each wing. We're on the front end of the 1st Task Force, picking them up in the Mannheim area, around the target, about 20 miles east of Mannheim, at which time we will proceed up to the aerodromes north of Frankfurt, where we will strafe. Now today, I want to use the same system we used the other day. That is, dividing the field up into sections, one squadron only on the field at one time. When the ammunition is expended from that squadron, you'll move up and let the other top cover squadron come down and strafe.
Okay, boys, we'll start engines at 8:50, take off 8:58 to 9:06, rendezvous with the big friends 11:04, escort until 11:24, strafe until 12:16.
The pilots make notes on the back or palm of their left hands. No chance of losing that little memo in a moment of excitement, or not much chance.
Okay, any more questions? Intelligence?
Intelligence takes over.
Gentlemen, you may expect considerable enemy opposition today. The Germans have brought in some 100 single-engine fighters, chiefly 109s, some 190s, to stop the American drive across the Rhine. Watch your flank at the Rhine River, at Mannheim, and particularly in the Frankfurt area. Now, after we break escort, There are 4 aerodromes which we've marked in red pins. You're free to strafe those aerodromes, but watch out for the flag. There are probably about 30 guns on each airfield. Send a flight down to silence the guns before you attempt to hit the planes on the field.
Then time check. A minute is a long time for an air fighter. In 10 seconds, the time will be exactly 0658.
Good luck, man.
Surprised? These fellows know what's at stake. Each man takes his emergency kit and empties his pockets. A scrap of paper might tell a big story to enemy intelligence if he has to bail out. Last but not least, each pilot picks up his chute and rubber dinghy on the way out. 20 minutes before takeoff time, trucks bring the pilots to their planes. The group leader gives his own flight special instructions. Techniques are proven and fairly standard, but they're rugged individualists, these fighter boys, and each leader has a few ideas of his own. All right, let's get aboard. Helmet is not only for warmth, it holds radio earphones too. Oxygen mask contains the mic. No hands to spare on this one-man kite. Here this pilot will fly and fight in the icy substratosphere or dusting the treetops of Germany for anything from 4 to 7 hours. Oh, my aching back. All clear? Let's go. Takeoff by 2s on the quarter minute. Element leader and his wingman. Expert takeoffs and landings are a point of pride with every squadron. While at other bases, timed to the escort schedule, the P-38s get underway. And at still others, here go the long-range Mustangs to keep their rendezvous with the big friends someplace deep in Germany. Somewhere out there over enemy territory, near or far on the long route as the bombers go out and come home, each of these fighter formations will make rendezvous with them at a certain point on the exact minute. These thunderbolts climb steadily over the channel and into hostile air. They keep fairly close together to prevent wandering and to save gas. That all-important item for the long-range escort fighter. He can't borrow a couple of coupons over Frankfurt or Cologne. Now they open up into battle formation, fairly line abreast. Each pair, leader and wingman, never willingly separated, is a combat element. 4 planes are a flight, 8 a section, 16 a squadron, 3 squadrons a group. All working together because it's teamwork every second or die. Just as simple as that. Close to rendezvous now, and in the distance are the bombers. Advanced formations of the perhaps 100-mile-long Armada. The Thunderbolts maneuver for their escort position. Each pilot searches the sky constantly, watching for the main enemy attack which may come near the coast or deep in Germany, or a hit-and-run sneak attack by the enemy's aerial snipers.
Red leader to outpost. Bogies at 10 o'clock level. Outpost to red leader. Your bogies look like friendly Spitfires.
But these black darts are not friendly.
This is red leader. All right, men on the ball. This is it. 109's at 9 o'clock. Yellow leader to outpost. 1-5 Wolf coming in. Outpost to red leader. Can we get them? It's our turn, Chief. Red leader to outpost. White flight drop tanks and attack. Red flight stay up for cover. Yellow flight continue to escort.
Red flight gets rid of its long-range wing tanks before the fight. Then down they go. The sneak attackers try to run for it now, but the Thunderbolts are on them. With the touch of the finger on the stick, a camera and 8 machine guns are put into action. Small cameras set in the wings make the record. Poor pictures due to gun vibration. But you see it when it happened, as the pilot saw it. armor-piercing incendiary 50 caliber ammunition makes a flash when it strikes, and how it strikes. Bombers, ready with their own guns for anything that slips through, didn't need them this time. All over now, just a skirmish, part of the escort routine. The flight reforms and climbs to regain its position with the rest of the squadron. In the distance, coming in to relieve the Thunderbolts, is a group of Mustangs.
This is Red Leader. Okay, men, it's time to break escort. Mustangs coming in at 8 o'clock.
The Thunderbolts break escort. They head for home, watching for every possible strafing target on the way. The Mustangs, far in the distance, sweep the surrounding sky as they come in. Next to the belly or wing tank, which doubled the fighter range, the most important feature of long-range fighter escort was the relay system. Because of differences in bomber and fighter speeds and the need of much weaving, fighters used up their time and distance almost twice as fast as the bombers. Thus, the same group of fighters could remain with the bombers only 25 to 40 minutes out of a 6 or 8 hour mission, going and coming. And 1,000 fighters might be needed to keep anything from 40 to 100 on the job at all times. While the enemy could strike with 250 at any point he selected, our fighter groups had to relieve one another at rendezvous points all along the route, like this. Simple in diagram, but difficult in the limitless, often weather-blinded spaces of the enemy air. It took planning, leadership, and most of all, it took individual fighting skill and courage to match the enemy's tactical advantages. Forewarned an hour and a half by his radar as our bombers gained altitude over England, he had plenty of time to mass his fighters at his chosen point of attack and to outnumber our escort at anything from 2 to 1 to 10 to 1. This captured film shows how quickly the 109s and the Focke-Wulf 190s got into action. They were as grimly determined to stop these great daylight thrusts into their industrial heart as our bombers and fighters were resolved to press them home to the hilt. In Germany now, weaving ahead, above, below, and all around the bombers like a screen of destroyers protecting the main fleet. A group of escorting Mustangs watches every corner of the sky. They don't have long to wait. Ceaseless training plus battle experience has taught them to recognize the enemy almost by instinct. Where they are, how they act. First hostile aircraft is spotted.
Blue Leader here. Watch it, fellows. 109 to 10 o'clock.
The enemy fighters are massing for an attack on the bombers while our pilots watch every move of their very tactics.
Yellow Leader to Blue Flight. Looks like they're trying to lead us away from the bombers. Green Leader here. You're right. Here comes another. 9 o'clock.
Blue Leader here. Blue Flight drop tanks. Yellow and Green Flight stay up for cover.
The Mustangs drop wing tanks and plunge into the fight. The head-on dive through the fortress's formation is a favorite. So fast sometimes, and so many, our fighters cannot head all of them off. The Huns make a sneak attack on our bombers from behind. Some of them get in close, as this captured enemy gun camera film shows, and hammer our bombers with their 20 millimeters. It's punishing, but they shall pay. The Mustangs are in the thick of it, and the battle ranges all over the sky as other formations join in. Jerrys attack in waves and sometimes inflict great damage before they're driven off. The B-17 catches fire and goes down in flames. The German pilots are determined. So are ours. to the death. Half his tail shot off, but still going ahead. And still they come. We lose another, but they cannot stop us. Our fighters, often heavily outnumbered, engage the enemy all over the sky. And this battle is only one of many. Day after day, month after month, Mustang, Thunderbolt, Lightning against the ME-109s and the FW-190s. Our fighters attacked, attacked. 2 into 10, 6 into 50. They broke up the enemy's mass assaults. Then his shattered flights were pounced upon and destroyed individually. Our victory column soared at the rate of 4 to 1. Great and gallant days they were. Many new aces, many empty places. Victory, victory, death, victory, victory. While our ever-increasing fleets of fortresses and liberators pressed relentlessly onto their targets, whenever attacked, they defended themselves with legendary gallantry and effectiveness. If a missed rendezvous or other misadventure, due usually to blinding weather, prevented fighter protection somewhere, they suffered heavy losses. But no American fighter ever failed them because of enemy odds, however great. Never was a mission turned back by enemy action. Our bomber and fighter losses, though strikingly less than the enemy's, were heavy. But the home front sent us more bombers and fighters, and more well-trained pilots, and our fleets grew mightier by the month. But the enemy first-line operational strength was maintained also. The great air battle of Europe was still undecided. In February 1944, there was a sudden change. Our fighters were ordered to range wider, even at some risk to the bombers, to seek the enemy instead of waiting for him, and above all, to follow him to his destruction. A gigantic fighter battle raged across the European skies with victories by our fighters alone of 60, 85, over 100 destroyed each day. The fight came down from almost invisible heights to the final decision, perhaps only a few feet above the ground. Enemy warplanes of every kind and in fantastic numbers were splashed all over the landscape of northwestern Germany and occupied Holland, Belgium, France. Watch this 190 hit the dust. crucial battle. Both sides aware of the coming events and air domination itself at stake. Once again, a better cause, better planning and leadership, better equipment, and beyond everything else, the know-how valor of our fighter pilots gave us victory. Only this time it was decisive. So many of his aircraft exploded over his own forests and housetops, or were driven, flaming wrecks, into the ground. So many of his famous fighter leaders met death at the hands of some grimly determined boy from Illinois, or Wyoming, or wherever, that his morale was shattered. His defense plan was smashed. The Luftwaffe cried, "Enough." The day arrived when a huge 8th Air Force bomber mission with full fighter escort was flown to Berlin and back in good weather without challenge by a single enemy fighter. Quickly now, our long-range escort fighters seized their opportunity. Since the enemy did not come up to fight, down they went to blast his planes to pieces and burn them on his own aerodromes all over Western Europe in the very heart of Germany. It was the most savage and devastating fighter ground attack on record. Returning from unchallenged escort duty and on many special missions, they burned his aircraft by hundreds, harried him from one airfield to another, forced on him a degree of dispersal ruinous to his efficiency. His frequently intense light flak, sheets of machine gun fire from flak towers and ground installation caused losses, heavy ones. 4 times as many as the same number of fighters would sustain in aerial combat. These are the films of the victors, and they do not show the cost. But our fighters never flinched, and by their fine courage, facing destruction in single-engine planes only a few feet above the ground, 500 miles from their bases, they smashed the heavily concentrated front-line operational strength of the German Air Force forever. These jerry revetments could be attacked only through the front door. These copied Allied Invasion Day stripes failed to deceive our pilots. The enemy often dispersed his aircraft in the woods fringing his airdromes. Always open season on this kind of sitting duck. Watch this boy reef it around for another crack. Steady, relentless bombing of Germany went on without ceasing. Against the enemy's occasional desperate efforts to intercept, we maintained fighter escort every step of the way. But the sky was ours, and another great opportunity was ours. His teeming, widespread, intricate transportation system. Feeding and supplying the great armies which he counted upon to throw our invasion forces back into the sea. Then something happened. The enemy's roads and railroads were struck with a mighty force of air power. They were tense days, crucial days, and both sides knew it. Our fighters, freed by their bitterly won victory in the air, became a dominant factor on the ground. These thunderbolts are dive bombing. They strike home. But by far the greatest, the almost paralyzing destruction they inflicted was by the burning, hard-hitting fire of their 50 caliber guns. They exploded locomotives by the thousand and burned freight cars in uncounted numbers. No train in daylight hours was safe. No marshalling yard a haven. The enemy's desperately needed rail transport system was shattered all over the map. Tank goes up, one of many.
Air Force. The Japanese have been carrying on their terror bombing campaign, and the little Chinese Air Force was being beaten and was eventually beaten badly.
In 1937, 2 years before the outbreak of World War II, the Japanese expanded their grip on Manchuria. The Chinese suffered terribly. Its seaports were attacked, and natural resources were seized to feed the imperial war machine. Towns were bombed relentlessly as the Japanese adopted a terror policy called the 3 alls: kill all, loot all, burn all. With obsolete aircraft, the Chinese Air Force was no match for the efficient, modern, and brutal Japanese. Claire Chennault had a solution.
The Chinese Air Force had been decimated, and it was important to keep China in the war. And the only way they could keep China in the war, they needed an instant Air Force. And the only way you're going to get an instant Air Force is to recruit professionals like the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. So Chennault came back to the States to make his case.
In early 1941, the United States was not yet at war with Japan. If American airmen were to fight the Japanese, they would have to do it as members of the Chinese Air Force. Working with secret U.S. government approval, Chennault put out the word that the Chinese were looking to hire qualified pilots and mechanics.
They were allowed to resign from the U.S. Armed Forces turn around and sign a lucrative contract with the Chinese government.
The pay was very good. The lowest pay for a pilot was $600 a month. That's for a wingman. Then you had $650 for flight leader, $750 for a squadron leader. So that was very attractive.
At nearly 3 times the usual salary of a military aviator, word of the generous offer spread quickly. It didn't take long to fill a roster with 99 eager pilots. Recruiters also contracted about 200 enlisted aircraft mechanics, armorers, radio operators, administrators, and even a chaplain. By July 1941, the airmen had traveled to Kidao Airfield in Burma, an airbase borrowed from the British. It was strategically located 300 miles from Lashio, the last stop of the Burma Road, the main supply route into China.
The single biggest reason for the Flying Tiger's existence was to defend the Burma Road. That road, which ran, as the name implies, from Burma into southern China, was the major supply route for sustaining Chinese military operations against the Japanese in that part of the world.
At Kidao Airfield, they took possession of their new aircraft, the P-40, and an official name, the American Volunteer Group, or AVG. Chennault divided his unit into 3 pursuit squadrons. Each had its own logo, but in the fall of 1941, all the squadrons adopted the soon-to-be-famous paint scheme for their Tomahawks. The menacing, grinning shark's mouth would become synonymous with the Flying Tigers.
We're looking at a publication that comes out of India, and it showed a lot of these Aussie airplanes, the P-40, just like we had. And it showed the shark's mouth on it. And it lends itself so well to that airplane that we adopted it.
By December 1941, the pilots of the AVG had been training for months, but had yet to test their skills. A few days before Christmas, they got their chance. On December 20th, they intercept and destroy 4 out of 10 Sally bombers before they strike Kunming, China. Three days later, they defeat another Japanese attack and rack up 11 kills, with 5 more probables. And on December 25th, they down an astounding 24 Japanese planes, a present for Hirohito on Christmas Day. But these early actions are all defensive, stopping incoming bomber raids. A few days after the new year, the Flying Tigers take the fight to the Japanese. January 3rd, 1942. It's pilot David Tex Hill's first mission for the Flying Tigers. Tex Hill left the Navy to volunteer. He's eager for action. He and 3 other American pilots aimed their P-40 Tomahawks toward the Japanese airfield at Raheng, Thailand. The plan? Arrive at dawn and devastate enemy aircraft on the ground.
Jack Newkirk, who was the squadron leader, and he had Bert Christman on his wing, and Jim Howard leading the element, and I was on Jim's wing.
Shortly after takeoff, one of the P-40s radios in.
Bert Christman had engine trouble, so he had to turn back.
Crispin heads for home. The 3 remaining P-40s continue on. They're over the target at first light. They make a left turn to align with the field and begin a shallow dive. The pilots line up one behind the other, about 950 feet apart, known as a string formation.
They would bend it over, which means to put your airplane in a dive, and accelerate as they came down to strafe the aircraft on the ground.
Their 1,200 horsepower Allison engines scream as they dive towards the airfield at 300 miles per hour. Jim Howard strafes the area, breaking the airfield with machine gun fire. Tex Hill dives after him, preparing his own strafing run. But the run is cut short. Tex sees a Ki-27 Nate at 10 o'clock streaking in right onto Howard's tail. It's Tex's first time in combat, and his friend's life is in his hands. January 3rd, 1942. The Flying Tigers take the fight to the Japanese and attack an airfield at Raheng, Thailand. Tex Hill's flight lead, Jim Howard, has just been attacked by a Japanese Nate. Jim Howard is here. The Nate is on his tail, here. Tex is here. Jim Howard strafes the airfield, and the Nate pumps lead into him. Tex closes on the Nate's tail and lines him up in his crosshairs.
Our ammo is loaded with every fifth round was a tracer. So it looked like just a big hose, you know, going out there. So I just looking right through the windscreen and following those tracers, and he blew up right in front of me.
He blasts through the churning fireball. At the other end of the airfield, Jim Howard pulls up from his strafing run, intact. It's Tex's first victory, but there's no time to celebrate. Another Nate is at 12 o'clock high, directly in front of him.
When I saw that other guy who was starting to make a pass on me, then I turned into him head on.
It's a defining moment for Tex, when he would demonstrate perfectly the strengths of the P-40 over the Japanese Nate. The P-40 was built by the Curtiss Aircraft Company in Buffalo, New York. Claire Chennault obtained 100 that were originally destined for the British RAF. The P-40B was rugged, could reach 378 miles per hour, and was heavily armed with two 50-caliber nose-mounted machine guns and 4 wing-mounted 30 calibers. It also had thick armor around the engine and cockpit to protect the pilot. Its opponent is the Nakajima Ki-27 Nate, which entered service in 1936. The Nate had an air-cooled radial engine and fixed landing gear. Its top speed was 305 miles per hour, and it was armed with one 12.7 millimeter and one 7.7 millimeter nose-mounted machine gun. The P-40 had better firepower and armor, but it was heavy and could not turn with the much lighter Japanese Nate. These fundamental differences in aircraft design philosophy were at the core of Claire Chennault's approach to dogfighting.
And the type of attacks he typically set up was to come in at high altitude, make screaming diving attacks against Japanese formations, take the energy that they built up, zoom climb up to a high altitude again, and come back around. He told his pilots, do not dogfight with the Japanese airplanes. It was certain death.
Facing a Japanese Nate head-on, Tex Hill applies these tactics. He knows the way to dogfight with a Nate is not to dogfight at all. Instead, he'll charge him with machine guns blazing. Tex Hill is here. The Nate is here. Tex will pull up into the Nate, aim towards him, and attack him head-on.
I'm pulling into him, and of course I had the firepower on the head-on.
The fighters close at over 600 miles per hour. The Nate peppers Tex's aircraft, but the P-40's armor plate does its job.
Eventually, the lighter armored Nate couldn't take the punishment and ended up spiraling out of control.
The Nate spirals into the jungle. The fight's over.
I had no idea what Howard and Newkirk was. I just headed right home, get out of that area.
Suddenly, Tex feels an intense vibration. His plane is shaking, unlike anything he's ever felt before.
The instruments are probably just almost shaking out of the panel itself, and he's probably wondering if he's even going to make it back to base.
He finally reaches Mingaladon Airfield, where Howard and Newkirk have also landed safely. He looks at his plane.
He shot 33 holes in my airplane. Some of his bullets stuck in my prop, and it threw the prop out of balance, and I thought the engine was coming out of the airplane.
The Flying Tigers' first offensive mission against the Japanese is a success. 4 enemy fighters destroyed in the air, 4 bombers on the ground. They were also gaining notoriety. The Flying Tigers didn't use military ranks or military discipline. They fought and played by their own rules, their raucous antics fueling their fame.
In Rangoon, they rode water buffalo down the street. They shot up the chandeliers in their favorite watering hole. They even had a pet leopard.
Chenault looked the other way, allowing the pilots to relieve the tension of constant combat, but he insisted on total discipline in the air.
I think he was an excellent leader. If you did your job right, why, he would back you at every time.
During its 6 months in combat, this handful of American soldiers of fortune claimed nearly 130 Japanese aircraft. 11 went down under the guns of Tex Hill's P-40 Tomahawk.
Here's a ragtag mercenary organization of former Army, Navy, Air Force officers and enlisted men who took on the Japanese head-to-head, very close to the Japanese home islands, and proved that the enemy, who appeared to be 10 feet tall, could be whittled down to size.
But after Pearl Harbor, a mercenary army wasn't needed anymore. The full might of the U.S. military was now in the war. Despite their legendary combat record, the decision was made to allow the American Volunteer Group's contract with the Chinese government to expire on July 4, 1942. But the Flying Tigers would live on. The Army soon created the China Air Task Force to oversee the air war in the Far East. The mission and men of the AVG would be rolled into the new unit as the 23rd Fighter Group. The China Air Task Force came under the control of colorful theater commander Joseph Vinegar Joe Stilwell.
The transition from the AVG to the China Air Task Force was somewhat messy. The pilots were being coerced to stay in the China Air Task Force, and it left a lot of bitter feelings.
Stilwell brought in General Clayton Bissell to talk to the AVG.
He could not have chosen a poorer man for the job. The Flying Tigers were gathered in an auditorium, and he basically laid it out. He said, "We want you to stay. If you don't want to stay, then you can go home, but we will have draft boards waiting for you at the gangplank in the United States, and you'll be drafted into the Army as privates in the infantry."
The pilots didn't take well to Stilwell's intimidation and threatened to leave en masse. Claire Chenault reactivated his commission and was promoted to general. He set out to clean up the mess and preserve the fighting spirit that made the Flying Tigers famous. He called Tex Hill into his office.
And Chenault said, "I think Bissell poisoned him. I don't think many of them are planning to stay. If I lose you, Tex, I'm not sure what I'm going to do." And Tex immediately said, "General, I'll stay as long as you need me." Chenault was obviously relieved and asked Tex to kind of talk to some of the guys and see if they would stay on, because these were the veterans.
In the end, 26 out of the remaining 90 AVG pilots and 57 out of 190 ground crew extended their contracts for 2 weeks, enough time to train the new arrivals. Tex and Chenault persuaded 5 Flying Tiger pilots to stay on longer to fight with the new command. On July 29, 1942, the new Flying Tigers would be in action. The Japanese mount a concerted effort to wipe them out. Several nights in a row, waves of Japanese bombers pummel the airstrip at Hengyang Airfield. Frustrated by the attacks, a soft-spoken, talented fighter pilot named John Allison approaches Tex Hill.
I said to Tex, as the AVG tried to stop them at night. And if I remember correctly, he said, well, we made some attempts, but we were never very successful at it. So I said to Tex, well, if they come tomorrow, I'm going to be up there.
The bombers do return, and this time John Allison and Tex Hill have a plan. It would be Allison's first taste of combat, and under a full moon, he would engage in one of the most famous dogfights in Flying Tiger's history. July 29, 1942, a full moon shines brightly over Hengyang Airfield. The Flying Tigers are in action again, and John Allison will get his first taste of combat. Allison has been alerted that a Japanese bomber formation is en route to attack the Tigers' base. He straps into his P-40 and launches into the air.
John Allison reminds me of no one as much as Jimmy Doolittle. They're both short in stature, very focused, precise types of aviation professionals, but when each of them climbed in the airplane, strapped in and started the engine, there was a personality change.
Tex Hill and John Allison have worked out a clever tactic to detect and engage the formation. Previous raids had shown them that the Japanese liked to bomb targets from 15,000 feet.
We didn't want them to get underneath us because at night you just can't see them, although you could see the flame from their exhaust.
Allison and veteran AVG pilot Ajax Baumler will be flying in a position called Up Moon. Lacking radar or navigation aids, the moonlight is their only help in detecting the Japanese. If the Japanese come in at their normal altitude, both pilots will see them silhouetted against the moonlit sky. If the Japanese come in under Allison, Baumler will see them. If they come in under Baumler, they will be low enough for the ground crew to spot them and radio in. Baumler levels off at 9,000 feet. Allison continues on to orbit at 12,000 feet. Somewhere in the darkness, the formation of 6 Japanese Ki-21 bombers approach in 2 3-plane elements. The Mitsubishi Ki-21 bomber, better known to the Allies as the Sally, was the workhorse of the Japanese Army Air Force in China. It could carry over 2,000 pounds of bombs. The Sally had incredible range, but this came at the cost of crew protection. It was very lightly armored. A fighter could shred the Sally with machine gun fire if he could get in close, but he would have to brave its 2 trainable 7.7mm machine guns, one in the nose and one in the tail. Allison gets a radio call. Crew at the airbase can hear the Sally's engines over them.
Finally, they were approaching our little airport at Hengyang from the north.
Allison and Baumler scan the skies, peering through the darkness for a glimpse of the bomber's exhaust. Allison twists his head around and catches a flash of exhaust. 3 Sallys above him.
I was 3,000 feet below them. I immediately opened the throttle full power and started to climb, and I said, okay, fellows, watch the fireworks.
Allison targets one of the 3 aircraft, but misjudges his closing speed.
My airplane was climbing fast and also going much faster than the bombers, and I turned to follow them, and I was right in the middle of the formation.
Suddenly, streams of tracers bracket Allison's P-40.
They were shooting at me, and my radio went dead. They had hit my radio. This is before I'd fired a shot, and they put one round right through the seat and into my parachute.
His engine is peppered as he flies through the stream of bullets. Allison must act quickly. In order to reposition himself behind the bombers, he'll rudder hard left and throttle down. It causes his plane to skid to the side and dramatically cuts his airspeed. The tactic works perfectly.
I probably wasn't 200 feet behind them, maybe even closer. And my first rounds are down the fuselage. And I know I must have killed everybody in the airplane.
The attack from point-blank range shreds the bomber. The wounded Sally pitches hard up, hemorrhaging oil, which splatters Allison's windshield. Allison has just knocked out one Sally, but there are two left. The formation's right wingman is the closest target, but its rear gunner has Allison in his crosshairs. Allison rolls right and swings in on the bomber's 6, braving a hail of tracer fire.
The one that had been hitting me on the right, hitting me most, I just gave him a burst and he exploded.
It's a confirmed kill. There's just one Sally left in the formation. The leader, but Allison's P-40 is wounded. It's taken a tremendous beating.
I didn't realize how hard I'd been hit, but they'd actually knocked a 5-inch hole through the crankcase, and all the oil was draining out, which I didn't know that. Thanks to the P-40 and its ruggedness, it kept flying.
Allison brakes left, slams his throttle forward, drawing a bead on the lead Sally. His bullets impact the aircraft's left engine. Trailing flaming debris, the Sally disappears into the darkness. It's Allison's third bomber. But with flames licking his engine cowling, it's time to head back to base and try to make an emergency landing.
When the airplane really started to burn, I kind of panicked, and I was going so fast I couldn't get into the airport. But fortunately, the river was right out ahead of me, and I said, oh, well, I can make the river.
Allison puts his crippled P-40 into the Xiangqiang River.
I popped out of the airplane, swam over to a log raft. A Chinese young man ran out across the logs, pulled me up, and in my best Chinese, I was shouting, I'm an American, I'm an American.
4 of the 6 Japanese bombers sent to strike the airfield are shot down. But these 6 bombers are just the first wave. Only hours later, in the light of day, the Japanese would send a far larger formation to eliminate the Americans once and for all. And this time, they're bringing Escort, a formation of advanced fighters more powerful than the Nate. They'll test the Flying Tigers like never before. July 30th, 1942, Southeast China. The 75th Fighter Squadron of the Flying Tigers scrambled to intercept a formation of enemy aircraft sent to level their home base at Hengyang Airfield. Tex Hill leads 10 P-40s into the fight. Hill climbs to meet a formation of 27 Japanese fighters that are leading the onslaught.
And then here comes this big fighter sweep.
Tex Hill is here. The formation of enemy fighters are here. Tex must climb to engage them. In true Flying Tigers style, he'll attack them head on. They aren't the familiar Nates. The fighters are a newer, advanced Japanese aircraft. The Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar is the successor to the Nate and entered service in the Pacific in 1941. Like all Japanese fighters, it traded armor for performance. Powered by a 1,150 horsepower engine and armed with 2 12.7 millimeter machine guns, It could fly faster and higher than the Nate. And they were flown by skilled Japanese Army pilots. All through the 1930s, the Japanese developed their military air arm. Both naval and Army aviators were highly skilled warriors of the Emperor.
The Japanese military culture was extremely mission-oriented. It was said that every Japanese warrior owed the Emperor his life. And if the mission called for sacrificing his life in advancing the cause of the Emperor, who many Japanese literally considered a living god, that was not only required, it was also deemed a significant honor.
Those guys were very well trained. I said, you know, the Japanese, anything that they did or set out to do, they just really excelled in it.
The Oscars spot the P-40s and move to engage. Tex opens his throttle, leading his squad of P-40s into the teeth of the Japanese assault. Tex will use the same tactics that have made the Flying Tigers famous. One of the Japanese Oscars pulls ahead of the rest. He goes head-to-head with Tex.
This guy and I came head-on, doing about 250 or something like that. He was doing around 200. That's pretty fast. But you know, you get a fixation on something like that. Sometimes with closing rate like that, well, you could very easily collide.
Tex and the Oscar open fire at the same time. The P-40 shudders as the Oscar's bullets hit home. Tex ignores it. He keeps closing. His 6 machine guns have a heavier weight of fire than the Oscar's 2 12.7mm guns.
The minute I hit him, he started smoking.
He immediately began to trail a thin trail of smoke, and we knew he was hit, and probably fatally.
The Oscar is an advanced Japanese fighter, but its weakness is the same: no armor. A split second before they collide, the Oscar bursts into flame and falls away. Tex Hill's P-40s went on to down 15 enemy fighters in the raid. The Japanese attack fails, and the Flying Tigers' home airfield is spared. The Japanese effort is derailed by Chennault's well-honed tactics. Avoid the turning fight and use the P-40's superior speed, power, and heavy armament. The tactics that worked against the Nate were equally effective against the Oscar. The China Air Task Force goes on the offensive. Japanese military and industrial sites are targeted throughout Southeast Asia. August 12, 1942. B-24 heavy bombers, supported by Flying Tiger P-40s, attacked the key shipping center at Haiphong, destroying ships, airfields, and vital supply dumps. In October, P-40s dive-bombed Japanese supply lines and strafed convoys in Burma. On November 27th, the largest force in China Air Task Force history strikes the port city of Canton on the Pearl River Delta. But on March 19, 1943, the small, scrappy China Air Task Force was replaced by a new organization, the 14th Air Force. Claire Chennault took command.
So naturally, the newcomers, the new guys on the block, attached themselves to the Flying Tiger name. After all, the same Claire Chennault was their commanding officer as well.
John Allison leads some of the most successful raids of the entire war. But his Asian tour is coming to a close. He is to be reassigned to the European theater. But on his last day in China, Allison will find himself in the most harrowing dogfight of his career. May 31st, 1943. John Allison's last mission as a Flying Tiger in China. He's flying with a squadron of Chinese pilots.
One Chinese squadron had just gotten brand new P-40s, and General Shaw asked me if I would go up and fly with them. And I said I'd be delighted to do that.
Since before the Tiger's arrival in China, Americans had been training and advising nationalist Chinese pilots.
I had 7 Chinese pilots, and I should have had 2 American wingmen, but one of them couldn't get his airplane started.
Allison and his Chinese wingman escort B-24s in a mission to attack a Japanese base at Ichang. The bombers, proud to be a part of the Flying Tiger's legacy, have painted each B-24 nose with the famous shark's teeth. There's heavy cloud cover as the P-40 fighters and B-24 bombers reach the target at Ichang. Allison spots a break in the clouds. He'll go down to reconnoiter. He radios the rest of the formation to stay above the clouds.
I said, let me go by myself. So I started, and I turned around, and I looked back, and I've got myself and my wingman, and then behind us are these 9 B-24s. And while we were having this conversation, all of a sudden, it's just as if someone had taken a handful of pepper and thrown it up through these black spots were busting through the ceiling.
20 Japanese Oscars have suddenly appeared. They're heading directly for the B-24s. Allison is here. The enemy Oscars climb towards the B-24s here. Allison must find some way to engage and divert the fighters from the bomber formation. He must act quickly. The lighter and more agile Japanese fighters are closing fast on the B-24s. Allison jams the stick back and rudders right in a climbing turn.
And I found myself climbing with all these Japanese fighters.
He pulls up on an easy target, an Oscar right in front of him.
The tracers hit his cockpit, and he just rolled over and dove straight into the cloud.
1 Oscar's down, but 19 are still pressing the attack. He maneuvers through the enemy formation, then lines up another Oscar in his sights.
I hit him, and he did catch fire. So I knew I got that one.
Allison pulls into a high G climb. 3 Oscars are attacking a B-24. Before he reaches the vulnerable bomber, he spots another bandit at 3 o'clock. Allison has to make a split-second decision. Allison is here. The bombers are here. The Oscar is on his 3 o'clock here.
But I figured that I could just pull my airplane up almost into a stall, and then I might be able to divert these 3 from their attack on the bombers.
It's a gutsy move. Allison will climb vertically towards the Oscars, letting loose a stream of fire to disrupt their attack. But he'll lose airspeed in the climb. If he stalls, he'll be an easy target for the Oscar on his tail. Allison pulls the stick into his chest. His airspeed falls off. He presses the trigger. His P-40 shudders in a stall. The Oscar opens fire.
And the next thing I knew, I lost my rudder. This airplane coming up from below had hit the main hinge of our rudder, and it fell off. But instead of leaving the airplane, it was still connected by the cable, and it started a terrible vibration.
With his rudder gone, Allison can't really maneuver his aircraft. The only thing he can do is just keep it level and airborne. So he's now vulnerable to any other enemy aircraft out there that decides to take him out.
The P-40 vibrates uncontrollably as it levels off. The Oscar rolls into position, lining up an easy kill. From 200 feet away, the Japanese plane fires. Pieces fly off Allison's fighter. The rugged P-40 absorbs the hits, but it can't stay in the air much longer.
And I said, well, if somebody doesn't help me soon, this is it. I'm gone. All of a sudden, I'm absolutely enveloped in a hail of tracers.
A Chinese fighter pilot has come to Allison's rescue. He's behind the Oscar, firing wildly.
So it's tracers from 650s. And I'd seen them from one perspective. Now I was seeing them from another, and a fatal one. And I thought, he's going to kill us both.
But the Chinese P-40 kills the Oscar. It goes down flaming. Barely hanging in the air, Allison turns for home, nursing his shredded Warhawk back to base. The B-24s successfully bomb the Japanese runways at Yichang. 5 enemy fighters are shot down. 1 Chinese P-40 is lost. John Allison left the Flying Tigers in May 1943, but returned to Asia only a few months later to help form the 1st Air Commandos with Philip Cochrane. The 1st Air Commandos supported the Allied effort in Burma and pioneered the use of gliders for long-range airdrops deep behind enemy lines. Tex Hill stayed in China until November 1944. He became a triple ace, downing 15 enemy aircraft. Claire Chennault led the 14th Air Force until 1945, when he retired. He stayed in the Far East after World War II, assisting Chiang Kai-shek in his war against Chinese communists in the late 1940s. The Flying Tigers of the 23rd Fighter Group went on to become one of the highest-scoring fighter groups of World War II. From 1942 until 1945, they destroyed over 1,000 Japanese aircraft. They sank 184 enemy merchant ships, destroyed 817 bridges, 1,225 locomotives, and killed nearly 60,000 Japanese troops. Their aggressiveness and skill carried forward the legacy of the original Flying Tigers, whose exploits became the stuff of legend. The shark-mouthed P-40s challenged the forces of tyranny with incredible ferocity. Raising the spirits of millions of Americans and Chinese in the darkest days of World War II.